Fairmont Crest has never been a place for small secrets. Here, a single glance can become a declaration of war. A single forgotten sheet of paper can bring down an entire dynasty. And a single name, whispered in the dark, can unleash an undercurrent powerful enough to drown anyone who stands too close. That night, while the lights in the Dupree estate still burned, and the sound of tires rolling past the gates echoed like a warning, an unmarked envelope was placed quietly outside Vernon's office door. Inside wasn't money, and it wasn't a direct threat, but a faded photograph and one line of handwriting, sharp as a blade, pointing back to a child who had once been erased from a hospital record years ago. No one knew where the envelope came from, but the instant Vernon saw it, a primal panic exploded in his chest as if he'd spent his entire life planting timed bombs around himself, and someone had just decided to start the countdown. At that exact moment, somewhere else in Fairmont Crest, Grayson stood before a small mirror in the staff lounge, his hands trembling slightly as he realized the truth he was about to reveal wouldn't just change his life, it would drag this entire community into a slaughterhouse of reputation, power, and revenge. Fairmont Crest had barely caught its breath after one shock after another when it was shoved into a new earthquake because Grayson, the man everyone assumed was just the new face at the hospital and the rare light pulling Ashley out of exhaustion, suddenly tore his own past wide open with a revelation one was prepared to hear. His biological father was not some nameless stranger the world could ignore, but a man so powerful that his mere presence could make the entire community shift color. The timing of this confession was almost cruel. Nicole was already spiraling under the weight of mounting pressure. Vernon was surrounded by lies closing in on him. Anita, fresh from treatment, felt as if the foundation of her family's world was being drained out from underneath her. Naomi was burying the truth of her medical results just to cling to a shred of fragile peace. Joey was quietly joining forces with Bill in legal maneuvers that reeked of danger. And Haley, relentless as ever, continued pushing her deadly plan forward step by step. But the most terrifying part wasn't the secret still hidden, it was the fact that Grayson knew exactly who his father was. And that name could be directly connected to the web of conspiracies tightening around Fairmont Crest, turning Ashley's fragile new love into a trap, turning the hospital into a battlefield, and turning one confession into a match capable of burning everything the Duprees was still trying to hold together. Grayson had spent his entire life living inside the one story his mother pressed into his mind like a prayer. His father was not worth naming, not worth searching for, not worth turning into the center of their lives. But the older Grayson became, the more he understood that story wasn't truth, it was survival strategy. His mother didn't hate the man because he was poor, because he abandoned them like a coward. She hated him because his shadow was too large, and that shadow could cover, crush, or bite anyone who dared step near it. When Grayson took the lab job at the Fairmont Crest Hospital, he wasn't just looking for employment. He was looking for a hiding place, a world where he could exist as ordinary without being swallowed whole by his history. But Fairmont Crest never gives anyone the right to be ordinary. Every day there feels like walking on glass, beautiful, spotless, shining until you take one wrong step and the blood begins to spill. Ashley was the first person who made Grayson forget his caution, not because she was perfect, but because her pain was real. Ashley carried exhaustion that didn't have a name, fractures no one could see as long as she smiled at the right times, and the way she forced herself to stay strong made Grayson both admire her and rage on her behalf. He hated how people around her treated her like part of the neighborhood's luxury decor, when in reality she was breaking apart. But that closeness became a blade as well, because once emotion seeped in, Grayson realized he couldn't keep Ashley near him while still burying the truth, because in Fairmont Crest, a secret never belongs to one person. The problem was, Grayson didn't have one secret. He had an entire minefield. The paperwork he accidentally glimpsed in the archives, the old records stamped sealed, the lab samples coded in strange ways, and one name that kept appearing in unofficial notes all sent ice through his veins. A child had once been delivered under special circumstances. One case the hospital had tried to delete from its system, and the way it was erased didn't feel like medical error. It felt like a crime scene scrubbed clean. Grayson told himself it could be ancient history, something buried for decades. But then he received an anonymous text, short and vicious. Everything he thought was dead was only waiting to breathe again. Before he could even process that, his mother called, her voice shaking like she'd just seen a ghost. Someone had come to her home. They hadn't threatened her. They hadn't raised their voice. They had simply placed a gift on the table and walked out. The gift was an old watch, exactly the kind she once saw on the wrist of the man who destroyed her life. No further explanation was needed. Grayson understood instantly. His father had found them, and that meant Fairmont Crest was about to learn a truth even Grayson wasn't sure he could survive. Nicole, meanwhile, had reached a place where every breath felt like dragging her entire body through swamp water. She was supposed to be the strong one, the woman who represented stability, class, and the illusion of order within Fairmont Crest. But lately, Nicole didn't believe in order anymore. Everything around her felt like decorative walls, beautiful, clean, perfectly aligned, but one hard touch would shatter them, exposing rotten concrete and deep, spreading cracks underneath. She had noticed strange looks inside her own home, half-hidden exchanges between Vernon and Anita, moments where she felt excluded from the family, as if she didn't even belong to the life she'd built. Nicole's anger didn't erupt loudly. It burned quietly, sharply, turning inward until she hated herself for feeling it. She hated that she was beginning to suspect the people she loved most. She hated having to become a detective in her own marriage, her own bloodline, her own history. But what she hated even more was the growing realization that she might have been lied to for years, that the life she took pride in could be nothing more than a stage set designed to keep her obedient and contained. Nicole wanted to scream, to shatter everything in reach, but she feared the consequences more than the pain. She feared becoming the Fairmont Crest spectacle, the woman who lost control, the humiliation her enemies had been waiting for. That fear turned Nicole into a prisoner, and prisoners either suffer in silence or they revolt so violently they destroy themselves. Anita returned from treatment calmer on the outside, but inside she was nothing but storm clouds. Anita saw that her family had reached a crossroads no one was prepared for. Part of her wanted to preserve the image, the dignity, the Dupree name, the position she and Vernon built with a lifetime of sacrifice. Another part of her knew some secrets had become poison, and holding them any longer would only rot them from the inside. She looked at Nicole and saw a woman suffocating inside a life too tight to breathe in. She looked at Naomi and saw fragility wrapped in survival instinct. She looked at Vernon and saw panic growing behind a man who once believed he controlled everything. Anita was furious with Vernon for not telling the truth, furious with herself for allowing the lies to grow, furious with Fairmont Crest for turning her family into a stage where everyone performs until they collapse. She understood the moment was coming when she would be forced to choose between truth and survival. And the horror was knowing that sometimes the truth doesn't just destroy reputations, it kills people. Vernon felt the blade closest against his throat, because he knew there were mistakes that couldn't be fixed with money, power, or apology. He had always believed he controlled the game, that every secret could be locked away behind thicker walls, tighter deals, colder handshakes. But the anonymous envelope proved otherwise. Someone was watching him, tracking his every step, and worse, they knew exactly where to press to make him bleed. Vernon didn't just fear exposure. He feared the revenge that might come with it, the unpredictable violence of consequences he could no longer manage. Suspicion infected him. Every person who walked into his home felt like a threat. Every phone call sounded like a trap. He looked at Nicole and saw frost in her eyes that felt like silent condemnation. He looked at Anita and felt her weighing choices that would not benefit him. Vernon wanted to hold the family together through force, but the harder he squeezed, the more he felt his own hands cracking what he was trying to save. And in that panic, he made yet another mistake. He tried to reach into the hospital system, using his influence to seal records again, to clean up the last traces. But Fairmont Crest never allows a dirty act to happen unseen. Someone always notices. Someone always keeps score. Naomi was trapped in a different battle, but it was just as savage. She held the truth of her medical results like a grenade in her hands. If she confessed, her life would change forever. If she stayed silent, she would rot from the inside out with fear. Naomi was angry at the world for demanding strength from her, angry at her family for shaping her into someone addicted to control, angry at herself for still craving love and softness and the moment of weakness. Jacob watched her without realizing the storm inside her, and that ignorance made Naomi ache and burn at the same time. She wanted to tell him and be understood, but she feared her truth would turn her into a burden, into a problem everyone would have to manage. Naomi had lived in Fairmont Crest long enough to know pity could be more poisonous than hate. When she heard the whispers about Grayson and his father's name, Naomi felt an invisible force tightening around all of them, turning personal pain into an interlocked net. She began wondering if this wave of disasters was random, or if someone was scripting the tragedy from the shadows. And that question stole her sleep, because if it was a plan, Naomi knew she could easily be the next target. Joey, on the other hand, didn't fear storms. Joey knew how to stand inside them and call it opportunity. He saw the Dupree family's chaos not as a disaster, but as an open door he could push through. When he joined forces with Bill, it wasn't just business. It was an unspoken oath that they would bend the law, turn other people's pain into profit. Joey's motive was clear: power. He believed Fairmont Crest was a throne waiting to be seized, and all it needed was the right shove at the right moment to collapse. Joey looked at Nicole as a symbol beginning to fracture, at Vernon as an aging man developing fear, at Anita as a queen growing tired. He wanted to pour gasoline into those cracks, but what Joey didn't anticipate was that Grayson's revelation and his father's identity could disrupt his rhythm. Because this wasn't just family scandal, it was a name big enough to crush Joey and Bill, if they chose the wrong side. For the first time, Joey felt something he despised, not fear, but the loss of control. Haley remained the most poisonous flame in the chaos, because she didn't just live to win, she lived to destroy. To Haley, love wasn't emotion, it was leverage. She didn't see Bill as a man she wanted. She saw him as a doorway into the life she craved. But as her deadly plan advanced, she met a problem she couldn't simply charm or intimidate away. Truth always finds a way to sabotage those who believe they can control everything. If Grayson's secret brought a new power into play, Haley would be forced to choose between continuing her plan or stepping back to avoid being crushed. And Haley hated retreat. Her anger left no room for hesitation, so she became more reckless, colder, more dangerous. She could approach Ashley, exploit her fragility, or even turn Grayson into a target if he became an obstacle. Haley didn't need moral justification. She only needed the feeling of winning. And that hunger made her willing to drag all of Fairmont Crest into hell if necessary. At the center of the storm, Grayson understood that if he spoke his father's name aloud, everything would change. But he also knew silence was no longer an option, because the shadows were already dragging him into the light. Ashley, the woman he wanted to protect, was the first person who would be hurt if the truth exploded. Grayson was furious at his father for returning, furious at his mother for hiding the secret for so long, furious at himself for ever dreaming of a normal life. He felt like a bomb wrapped in human skin, ready to detonate at any moment. The cruelest part was that he didn't know how to disarm himself without sacrificing someone else. For one moment of weakness, Grayson considered running, disappearing before the truth could reach Fairmont Crest. But then he saw Ashley, the way she fought to stay upright while her world cracked, and he realized that running would only be another form of betrayal. In Fairmont Crest, anyone who flees from truth becomes guilty, no matter how innocent they are. So Grayson chose to face it. What he didn't know was that the moment he chose to stand still, someone else chose to strike first. The hospital began experiencing small disruptions, but they came one after another, almost as if someone was manufacturing chaos to hide something larger. A lab sample vanished, a critical case was misrouted, an old record was ripped from the archives. Ashley witnessed these cracks and started to suspect the hospital was no longer safe, that a war was unfolding inside those pristine white corridors. She was angry at being dragged into another crisis, angry that her life always seemed to be controlled by forces beyond her, angry that the moment her heart began to open, danger rushed in to punish her. Ashley wanted to trust Grayson, but the truth about his father felt like a dark stain spreading across everything. It made her wonder if she was falling for a man, or walking straight into a trap that had been set long before she arrived. That doubt tore at her, because she hated uncertainty, hated feeling trapped between logic and emotion. And in Fairmont Crest, every choice has a price. The real shock arrived when a moment meant to be private became public disaster. Grayson's father's name was leaked in the most ruthless way possible, as if someone wanted to throw it into the crowd, just to watch who would be torn apart first. The news spread like fire on gasoline. Ice shifted, calls poured in, and the Dupree family immediately understood this wasn't simply the personal drama of a new young man, it was a direct strike at the foundation of their power. Nicole felt as if she'd been slapped, because she recognized that name as a doorway to questions she had avoided for too long. Anita felt old memories surge back, memories of deals written in blood. Vernon knew he had lost a move, and that panic made him capable of anything to regain control. Joey smelled opportunity, but also danger. Haley saw an obstacle, but also a weakness she could exploit. And Grayson, standing at the center of it all, realized Fairmont Crest was no longer a wealthy gated community, it was a battlefield. No one in Fairmont Crest truly wins in a war like this. Because when secrets surface, the first casualty is always trust. And when trust dies, love stops being safe. Ashley was forced to face the sensation of betrayal, even though Grayson never wanted to hurt her. Nicole was forced to confront the possibility that her family's empire was built on sins she never knew existed. Anita was forced to ask herself whether she was strong enough to save the people she loved, or whether she would become the one who pushed them over the edge in the name of reputation. Naomi was forced to face her own fear, and realize the world rarely gives anyone time to heal. Vernon was forced to face the consequences of a lifetime of manipulation, and that fear could turn him into an animal cornered and ready to bite. Joey and Haley, who believed they were the chess masters, began to sense a bigger board unfolding, one where they were nothing but pawns. And when night finally settled over Fairmont Crest, the silence became more terrifying than screams, because inside that silence, every person was planning, calculating how to survive after this earthquake. But buried beneath the quiet was one question, sharp as a nail driven into every mind. If Grayson's biological father has entered the game, did he come to reclaim his son, to destroy the Dupree family, or to bury a crime even darker than anything they ever imagined? And the cruelest part was knowing the answer might arrive in a way, one could brace for when a true loss occurs. Brutal enough to turn everyone left standing into someone willing to do the worst things imaginable, just to make sure they aren't the next victim.